Welcome to the Efed podcast, the podcast exploring our fantasy wrestling hobby where the wrestling is written, but the characters are real. I'm your host, Mikey Unlikely, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here on the Atomic Dropcast Network.
And we're back, episode 62 of the Efed podcast. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on the Atomic Dropcast Network. I'm back, Mikey Unlikely, your host, back with my co-host, Brian. Brian, how you doing today, buddy?
I am doing fantastic. Glad to be here. Glad to be back. How are you, sir?
I'm always good, especially when we're on episode 62. That's our new gimmick. We're going to steal it from every wrestling fan in the world.
I say, if you don't like it now, I don't know what to tell you.
It's going to keep happening. Get ready for 72. So, but before we get there, we've got an interview today with Colin. Colin's a longtime handler of Cecilworth Farthington, most recently of High Octane Wrestling, actually a former Defiant as well, and as well as Wrestle UTA.
To be honest, I always thought it would be pronounced Cecilworth.
See, and I start the interview calling him Cecilworth, and then I'm somewhat corrected. He doesn't correct me directly, but he starts pronouncing it otherwise. So
there you go.
I've since adjusted my pronunciation.
Very professional of you.
Speaking of professional, we've got the spotlight back again this week.
Ooh.
And this week, the spotlight is on Universal Wrestling League, Brian. One of the longtime angle feds out there on the interwebs. I've been a handler under their fed head, Jay Jefferson, before in another fed, and can highly recommend him. So I'm excited to see what UWL will be bringing to the table.
Very nice. Always love to see a great moving forward, still pumping, going. I don't know the words these days. Angle fed. I love to see a good angle fed.
There you go. You know, obviously we both handle in a big time angle fed, and we're excited to see another one out there. UWL has been around for many, many years, and we're going to talk about them and much more on the show. As far as the question of the week goes, we've got real wrestling move names. Are you ready?
Are you ready?
Do you hate when people use the real names of wrestling moves, or do you prefer they use the gimmick names? We're going to talk about that and much more. You can catch us on Twitter at the Efed Podcast. Of course, we're also on Facebook, Brian, at the Efed Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
On the YouTube machine, just search the Efed Podcast.
Yes, sir.
And finally, over at patreon.com/Efed Podcast, if you want to support the show, we would greatly appreciate you. Of course, we are a free podcast coming to you each and every week, but we do incur some costs with what we do, and we would greatly appreciate any help you would like to provide over at patreon.com/Efed Podcast. And we got a nice set of perks to go along with it.
100%. You can't afford not to, but if for some reason you can, don't forget efedpodcast.com.
efedpodcast.com. You can find us over there. And of course, EWTs.com.
100%.
That's another proprietary blend of Brian and I. That's kind of a weird way to describe it, but I'm down with it. You can catch us over at efedtees.com, EWTs.com, or EWmerch.com. We've got it all. It's the best place to find t-shirts for your e-wrestler, your tag team, stable, fed, it doesn't matter, over at efedtees.com. We can hook you up with custom merchandise for your efed needs.
If you want it, we can make it. If you got it, we'll put it on something.
And if you don't got it, we can help you make it.
100%. Handsome graphics.
Great graphics. Check out some examples over at efedtees.com right now.
.com.
Brian, we're going to dive into the show. I'm so excited to get started. We got Colin on the interview. We got UWO on the spotlight. We got the question of the week, which is always interesting to get everybody's views. But first, we've got our sponsors.
This is Lee Best, the GOD of HOWrestling.com, coming to you live from the High Octane Studios, where I'm one of the official sponsors of the Efed Podcast. Join us every Saturday night at 7:30 on twitch.tv/HOWrestling. We present live to you Refueled, premier RP destination for all Efed.
The Efed Podcast is a totally free podcast that drops each and every single week for your e-wrestling ears,
on a multitude of apps. If you'd like to support the show, however, the best way to do so is over at patreon.com/Efed podcast. For as little as $3 a month, you can support both Brian and myself as we crank out more e-wrestling content with perks such as early releases and special Discord designations. And if that's not enough EW action for you, jump up to the $10 a month tier and you can get a free EWT's t-shirt design, early and ad-free editions of the show, as well as access to our monthly Q&As, bad graps, and more. And if you'd like to be a sponsor on the show and get your ad played, the best way to do that is the sponsor level on Patreon, with all of the previous perks, plus weekly commercials on the show. Check it out over at patreon.com/Efed podcast. We greatly appreciate your consideration.
Occupy Pro Wrestling, putting the smart back into smart mark since 2012, with a community on Discord and message boards, merchandise, a weekly vodcast on Twitch, and much more. Check out everything from us and our site partners at OccupyProWrestling.com.
Efed Tees, the #1 source for Efed merchandise, offering custom merchandise made for your wrestler, tag team, stable, or Efed. Whether you want a high-quality t-shirt, face mask, hoodie, hat, it doesn't matter. We can help you out over at EfedTees.com. Do you have a custom logo for your wrestler? Awesome. We're going to slap it on a shirt and help you out real fast. If not, no problem at all. We have a custom design service too. You can work with a graphic artist to get the perfect design made for your character. Go on over to EWTees.com and click on Want a Shirt to get your shirt started. EfedTees.com.
Defiance, an angle-fed boasting 8 years of continuous fantasy wrestling. Defiance offers opportunities for original characters, micros, a standalone website utilizing Backstage 3 script, and a forum hosted on the long-running FWrestling.com, as well as a roster full of some of the most experienced writers in the game. Come see for yourself at DefianceWrestling.com. That's DefianceWrestling.com.
Welcome back to the Efed Spotlight, a segment on the show where we highlight an Efed that's out there. We're going to tell you a little bit about them and see if they're a great fit for you. I'm excited, Brian. This is how many people out there have messaged me. They found an Efed that was for them. They asked me to hook them up with the Fed, and it's worked out great. So this has been a terrific segment on the show, and it's helped a lot of people find a new e-home.
Truly fantastic, broadening horizons and really expanding people's view of the Efed universe as it is today.
Absolutely. And, we're talking about the Angle universe today. Defiance Wrestling, of course, we sit in the Angle universe. And sometimes it's hard to see other Angle Feds out there because you kind of encapsulate yourself in your own stories.
I think someone mentioned it, maybe Mel, 2 interviews ago, that it was only about 5-6 years ago she even stumbled across Angle, and I was about the same 6-7 years ago, and even no Angle was around. Heard it, but didn't know about it, and man, once I got in it, loved it. It's incredible. It's great, and if you've never experienced Angle yourself, and you're mostly an RP person, and you like story, I would highly suggest you give an Angle Fed a try, and maybe it's UWL.
That's right. We're going to check out the UWL today, the Universal Wrestling League. They operate on a bi-weekly system, Brian, and they bring a mix of old school mentality with a modern twist in an Angle Fed.
Very nice. And a bi-weekly, especially for Angle, is a great time schedule. So how often, though, are there shows?
So they say the shows are bi-weekly, but they also operate 2 to 3 house shows a month. With quick results and few notes. Pay-per-views are every 5 to 6 weeks with a special TV 4 times a year.
That's still a very doable schedule within Angle Fed. So, again, we've talked about many times, rules and word limits. Word limits are very important. So what are we looking at here for word limits?
So you're really not looking at word limits, which is a great thing about an Angle Fed, is you have the opportunity to expand your story however you see fit. The more you contribute, examine, review, and do predictions as far as sending in segments and storylines, you can help develop your angles and feuds, the better you'll be pushed. So basically, it's the same as any Angle Fed. the more you participate, the more you're going to get back.
Participation. You love to see it, Christy.
You love to see it.
Speaking of things Christy loves to see, let's talk championships. What are we looking at as far as championship titles?
UWO's got a pretty good sized roster, so they've got a pretty good sized championship list as well. We're looking at a world championship, a television championship, the United States, the tag team championships, and of course the United States tag team championships.
I'd be very interested to read up and see kind of what they got going on as far as how they handle the TV part of those. That's really good.
I love a good tag team division. You know, the Hollywood Bruvs have been long-standing tag team partners. Love to see anywhere there's more than one tag team title. It means it must be a pretty strong division.
100%. Nothing makes a world tag team or a tag team championship look more like a bigger deal than a secondary tag team.
True story.
So speaking of that roster, let's run down a little bit of a top 10. No particular order. Who's over there?
They got AJ Knight, who I've seen a lot on Twitter machine.
Nice. Also Casey Holiday.
Emma Douglas.
Kaleida.
Jackson Burnside.
Arch Stanton.
Aiden Prince.
John Thompson.
Hey, that's our guy over at TW Combat.
That's right. Shout out TW Combat.
James Edwards.
And also Lilith Rising.
There you go. Pretty good stacked roster over at UWL. And I know as far as a number of members, they're toting 38 roster members.
Ooh, that list of championships makes incredible sense now with 38 active members.
That's a lot of people on your roster, and that's strong in e-wrestling. You love to see it, Christy.
Oh, you love to see it.
Everybody talked about how dead e-wrestling was a few years ago, and now everybody's got rosters that are growing and growing. Of course, guys, you can find the UWL at UWLonline44.boards.net. That's UWL online 44.boards.net. And of course, like I mentioned before, Jay Jefferson runs the show over at the UWL. Great Fed head, very creative. I worked with him in an a role play Fed, and I'm very eager to see what he's doing over at the UWL now in angle style.
100%. And if you're I can't stress enough, if you're a role play person, I was for my breadth of this hobby.
Forever, yeah.
If you're a roleplay person and you want to dip your toes in the angle side of things, UWL sounds as good of an angle as anything I've heard. So try it out. Angle is really freeing, depending on what you're looking for in this hobby.
True story. And you can find them on Twitter at UWL Online. And again, you can find them online. That's kind of hard to say. UWL Online 44.boards.net. There it is. Guys, check out the UWL. Great angle Fed. Thanks so much for being a spotlight of the week here on the Efed podcast.
Efed podcast, Bobby Dean. That's me.
All right, guys, it's time for the Efed podcast question of the week. Of course, you can find the question of the week each and every week over on Twitter at the Efed Podcast. Pinned to the top of the profile. You can catch it on Facebook at the Efed Podcast. And you can catch it in the Discord. If you need that link, hit us up on the Twitter machine. Guys, question of the week this week. Should you use real wrestling move names in Efedding, i.e. the Rock Bottom, the Stinger Splash, the Crippler Crossface, and the Brogue Kick?
Oh, great fucking question.
Great question.
I'm new here. Can we curse?
Yeah, we can curse. Absolutely. We're rated M for mature.
Not safe for work.
Brian, what's your feelings on this question of the week? Should you use real wrestler move names in Efedding?
I believe 100% not. Now, they're obviously, the DDT. That was a name used by Jake Roberts that is now synonymous with the move. Cool, fine, it's accepted. But yeah, Rock Bottom, Stinger Splash, Cripple Crossface, Brogue Kick. No, we should not use them unless it's a real wrestler fed, I guess. But I'm completely fine with them being referenced in a bio for it to tell someone what you intend the move to be. Quick reference, no problem with that. But yeah, it should not. If you're not doing real wrestlers, I don't believe it should be on your show.
It's definitely a testy subject. I am of the opinion that get it the hell out of here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not a fan, and I get it. It's hard to describe moves. I'm of the feeling if the guy invented it, great, that's the name of the move.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you gotta kind of go with the description of. So a lot of interesting opinions on this week's question of the week. Let's get into them, Brian.
Let's do it.
On Twitter @NewExtremesW.
A mix for us. There are some like the Gory Special or a quote unquote Harley Race-esque knee, but a rock bottom would be a urinage.
Uranagi.
Okay. One we are split on is Erwin, called the Tiger Fiend Kick. Max calls it the 619.
What would you call that move, Brian?
I had never seen it prior to
Rey Mysterio. So, I mean, personally, I'd call it the 619. But if I was going to use it, I would go back. I'd go back. Yeah, change the name, go back, figure out whatever. But maybe on a bio, I'd still reference it a 619. But the biggest thing, the biggest thing we really have to keep in mind here, I would never, ever use the 619.
Use that terrible move for a finish.
I love it. Over also on Twitter @_EmpireW.
It can have its own name, but you can use it to describe the move, i.e., someone having the Revolt (parentheses Cradle Shock) in their bio as their finisher, or Legacy Maker (parentheses Sister Abigail), rather than trying to describe how the move is done.
Interesting.
I'm mostly with that.
Putting the name, your signature name on it, and then in parentheses describing the original name. It's interesting how everybody looks at it, because for some people it's not a big deal at all, and others it's a huge deal.
Yeah, it really just depends on what level of bullshit elitist you are.
@Armenian Beast.
You shouldn't avoid it like the plague. If it helps you develop the character, have at it, Hoss. But if at all possible, come up with your own name.
Hoss fight.
I can dig where he's coming from for sure.
100% to steal from you. @Dresden45.
I don't see why not. Though, specifically speaking, you're better off just doing it in the set move set.
Dresden's playing a different game than we are, Brian.
#set move set.
Set the move set and move on. @Failed Rhetoric.
The only good spear is done by Vlasic. I assume he means the pickle. And not your shitty finisher. To the question, no. Don't be a freaking nerdy loser. Parentheses. As I tweet from my personal account, close parentheses.
Thanks, Jay.
Yeah, thanks, bud.
Yeah, @Many-Faced Heel on Twitter.
I like custom names for the moves myself. Custom characters, signature moves, and finisher names.
I agreed.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the move names, use the signature name, but don't call it like the sharpshooter.
Yeah. I mean, because let's be honest, no one likes Brett or the sharpshooter.
That's Brian's opinion only, and not the views of the Efed podcast. @Yinzer says what?
I'd say no. The move names are part of that specific wrestler's character. You can use the same maneuver. It happens all the time. Just come up with your own character's own name for it. I agree.
Yes, agreed. Totally agreed. But again, this is just our opinion. @WWJBCD.
JBC would say, the reason I'd say yes is because it makes it an easier reference. I mean, at least if you use them in your bio. for your list of moves. Not everyone knows what a Uranagi is.
Hey, there you go.
Hey, spelled different than that last one. Uranagi is, but people do know what a rock bottom is.
Mm-hmm.
Like when it comes to referring to your own moves, no.
So basically, like you said, Brian, if it's in your bio, cool. That's a great way to describe your move. But if it's on the show,
yeah, as a reference point.
Yep.
And if anyone reading the show is involved in the deal and reads the show, like, I'm not sure what that move is.
Go to the bio.
Check the bio. That's what it's there for. It's a reference.
At RL Edgar.
Yeah. It's going to be a no for me, dog.
Hit us with the GIF. I love it. Over on the Discord side of things, we've got at number 2 in votes, but number 1 in your heart, Brian. It's the Fuzzmaster Flex himself.
Do we have to?
This is also a GIF.
No. 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 Hell no. No.
It's more like no. No. Hell no. No. Tracy McGrady from Cop Out.
It's fuzz, so it's kind of no. It's a low effort no.
You let us know what you think over on youtube.com/c/Efed podcast.
Respond to the YouTube comments, like, subscribe, ring the bell, rate, review.
There you go. Brian knows the deal.
Ew.
I'm still learning. Over on the Discord, we got at Meg.
Oh, Meg. Meg says no for many reasons. I had Megan G use the chick kick, which is Trish's finisher. I assume she made some lady she knows named Trish. I am not going to use the chick kick name. I actually named the finisher the softball kick.
I love it when they kick the ball in softball.
It's a good way to get a bruised
shin. I, for one, love Trish, so the chick kick is I'm all in for it. At Roland.
Not unless it's pick based.
Hey-o. Up next is at Cat Pasadena.
Depends. Some moves, Walls of Jericho, Even Flow DDT, Stinger Splash, have become unique in the sense that they're executed slightly different than the generic counterparts. Boston Crab, DDT, Corner Splash. I don't mind using the description to name those moves to paint a clearer picture, but the announcers probably shouldn't be calling them that.
The announcers should be calling him Splash Cassidy because that's a great name. This whole thing started with the Stinger Splash. That's why we're here today, guys. There was a conversation in Defiance Wrestling about whether you should use these move names or not. And it all started with a Stinger Splash. At John Thompson, TW Combat.
John Thompson actually uses a Claymore kick and the Angle Slam as a signature move. For the Claymore kick, I couldn't think of a better name, but I don't know the technical name for the Angle Slam. I know that it is used in actual competition, though.
So the weird thing about the Angle Slam is I've heard it referred to as the Olympic Slam, which still refers to Kurt Angle.
Yeah.
So I don't know on that one. That's a tough one.
For that slam in particular, or anything him or Taz did, you could look to judo and probably find some proper names.
Very close, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, at Miracle Enterprises.
The description can be the move, so people know what it is. But the name you use for it should be different.
True story. Thanks,
Agreed.
Miracle Man.
Yep.
At Seth is Burns.
Yes. To named moves in the description only to help readers identify a particular move. No to named moves being used by the announcers. If real wrestlers don't exist, their moves should not either. Mm-hmm. On a related note, Oscar Burns has a new move called the 3-4 face lock jawbreaker. He will be debuting.
I'm sure it'll come out of nowhere. Mikey Unlikely will be debuting the Chokeslam from Hell this week. Not very much. So up next is, hey, it's MJ, Hall of Famer at Pop Pop.
Shoot, Pop Pop. Yeah. Arthur uses the provocation as one of his finishers. I describe it as a single leg drop kick.
There you go.
It's actually the Claymore. John. There you go, bud. I never use a WWE, WCW, TNA, whatever designation for a move because I feel like it takes the reader out of the immersion process and replaces what they see in their imagination for an e-wrestler with the WWE, WCW, TNA, whatever person whose move it is.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, and MJ, you just capped this motherfucker off with the most succinct shit, and you're not done, so don't ruin it here, bud. So for me, I always write, he just hit him with a high-impact elevated splash instead of a stinger splash. The only exception to this rule, the only exception to this rule that I can think of would be the sharpshooter. Incorrect. You're fired. Go back to shoot. You're done. You're done.
Got him. He's not. Thanks, MJ. We got Brian together.
I don't think anyone knows what the base description designation for that move actually is without getting wordy.
It is a cross leg turnover Boston Crab.
He said without getting wordy.
It's one word. Cross leg turnover Boston Crab.
Touche. Now, MJ nailed it on the head, except for that sharpshooter dig.
At Ernest Saves E-Wrestling.
All I want to do now is create a character whose moveset is actual wrestlers' finishers, all being called by their names. So, yes, you should.
Check out Jakey's interview last week on the show.
Indeed.
Here on the Efed Podcast, episode 61. One fall. And that's going to wrap us up for the Efed Podcast question of the week. Thank you, everyone, for answering. We appreciate it. It makes this so much more fun. Check us out over on Twitter at the Efed Podcast. Of course, the question of the week is pinned to the top of the profile for 2 actually for like a couple of days. So check it out, Efed Podcast, at the Efed Podcast on Twitter. Check us out at the Efed Podcast on Facebook. And of course, on the Discord, you can also find the question of the week. Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the Efed Podcast interview series. Today, we're joined by longtime Efeder and a guy I've been bouncing around with Feds in for the last, 4 or 5 years. He is character is Cecilworth Farthington of High Octane Wrestling. Today we're interviewing Colin, as many of you know from both High Octane Wrestling Radio as well as frequent guests on other radio shows. Isn't that right, Colin?
I just love the sound of my own voice. that's the only reason. You guys got a radio show? I'll get involved in that.
And
I'll listen back and yeah.
And we all love the same soothing tones that you'd like to share with us. No, but thank you.
The singing is the horrifying part.
The singing. Yeah, and people are asking you to sing later on in the show, so we'll get to that. I don't know how many drinks you've had.
They are wrong, and they have made a horrible error.
It's been a terrible mistake, but we're going to have fun today. Colin, I hope you're doing well. Thank you for taking the time to join the show, buddy.
Yeah, thanks, bud. You're saying High Octane Wrestling. It's funny because you're back in HOW now, so you were in the Discord. And there was a chat earlier in the week, and I just announced that I'm likely retired. And I caught Lee hitting me up angry, saying, "What you're saying? So you're saying that Mikey won't say that you're from How anymore?" I said, "No, I just said I'm retired from RPing. I'm not retired from How. I was just on the Twitch stream with you last week. It doesn't mean that I'm."
You're not retired until you've been gone for a year. I think that's the rule.
Yeah, and then I was gone for 2016 to 2019, and yet somehow
you came back.
Here we are again.
Well, very good. And recently retired from role playing then over in High Octane Wrestling, but still part of the family, still probably going to be staffing or hanging out or doing what?
Just being annoying. I live to annoy Lee.
Mm-hmm.
He's constantly commented that he can't do anything in the Discord without me ruining it immediately. I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to I've been like a bull in a red rag to things like that. So I'm trying to be more of an adult in the room now. But no, like probably I'll give him help with the radio stuff when he needs like a co-host. Like I know Mike's normally the common one, but Mike's not always around. And then I'm sure I like to do feedback stuff and all that. I'll still be hanging around for that kind of thing.
Good deal. Well, we're glad you will be, and it probably wouldn't be the same without you. Now that you're the most recent High Octane Hall of Famer as well.
Yeah, that was absolute surprise to me. So just to give you the story on that one, I moved to Thailand to work for a brief stint. Yeah, it didn't work out, but that's fine. I've got a better job. But while I was there, it was my first, so I'd had to spend 2 weeks in quarantine. And it's an odd thing, quarantine over there, because you arrive at the airport and it's all these military guys with guns and all that walking around. Wow. And so when you arrive, it's like they do you in sections. So it's like one section you hand over the paperwork, then one section they're testing your temperature, and they mark you from section to section. So there's no like free movement in the airport at all. And then when you go through the whole thing, immediately there's a van that picks you up directly from the airport and takes you to the hotel. The hotel drop you in your room, and then you're just in your room for 14 days.
Amazing.
And they bring you 3 meals a day, and like 2 temperature checks. So like in the morning they knock on the door for breakfast and check your temperature. In the evening they do the same thing. And so I got out of that, and I was at my first day of my job. And so this is a brand new job, don't know anyone. And my phone keeps blowing up, but I'm trying, it's your first day on your job. So you're trying to meet people, you're trying to
can't answer,
people,
yeah.
Get things sorted, like running around, like doing all the paperwork. And then I keep on seeing my phone, like, you need to get on the show. You need to get on the show. Colin, why are you not on the show? I'm like, So it was very fortunate. So one of the classes I was meant to be teaching that day, I'm a teacher for reference, but one of the classes I was meant to be teaching that day were on a field trip. So I had that lesson free. And so finally I looked at my phone and I had like missed calls from Mike, missed calls from Lee, all these messages from people saying you need to call in. And then finally I was like, okay, I'm free now. So I think they restarted the radio show because everyone went to bed. They like fire up this video, and it was this My Sacrifice Chris Kostov video. So and Lee's like, I was just wanting to know your reaction to this. And I'm like, Kostov's a good guy. And I think they were doing a fundraiser for him at the time. So I just thought like Lee likes to pull me into radio stuff and like be the nice guy who talks things up well. so I assumed that's what it was. And then it gets to the very, very end of the video, and then there's just this small graphic saying Hall of Fame. I'm like, wait, hang on, what?
And that's the part that he tried to sneak in and pop you on.
He's a sneaky boy sometimes.
He is. He loves it too, as he said many times on our show. His favorite part is the sneaky stuff.
That was I really enjoyed listening to. Yeah, he loves that kind of stuff. I'm always torn in it, like the working the boys kind of thing, because it's like, it pops everyone, but sometimes it's counterproductive as well. Yeah. So I'm always 2 camps with it.
You never know what's going to happen. Even if you feel like you've won your match, you don't know what's coming up for your character.
Absolutely.
Well, very good. Well, yeah, let's talk about how, first of all, let's start at the beginning. How did you become a fan of professional wrestling? When and how?
So it's interesting, because I know you always ask this question. So I was thinking back to what my first wrestling memory is, and funnily enough, my first wrestling memory is something where I didn't go at all. It was my older brother, and I remember it was it must have been early 90s because Ultimate Warrior was on the card, and they were doing a European tour, and my brother and my cousin, who's around the same age of him, and I think my dad, got dropped off to go see the show. And then me and my mum just up to visit my gran or something like that. So it's like all the older ones go off to see the wrestling, and I was just like, all right, okay, I'll go see my gran. So that was like my first memory of wrestling and being kind of aware of wrestling. But when I first kind of saw it was, we got cable in the house, and I remember it was probably around 98 Austin McMahon stuff. I was a tiny little Mark child, so I was like 10 years old. And it was that match where Austin was the referee for Kane Undertaker, and Vince McMahon fired him at the end. And I think I was like genuinely upset and possibly crying at the fact that Steve Austin was fired. It was like 10-year-old me was like, oh no, Steve Austin. Oh, he's cool.
It's so great that when the kayfabe is real for you, when you fully believe it, and those reactions, and it's hard to see yourself through those eyes. But recently, I got to see my own kids have that reaction for the first time, and it's awesome, man. Even as a parent, or even as another wrestling fan, just to see someone just fully dive in or just lose that disbelief, it's truly great.
And I've actually had moments like that recently as well. Like I was watching Wrestle Kingdom in January, and I love Kota Ibushi. He is a weird human who wants his own neck, and he's just fascinating. And so, he had the big title match in the main event, and he ended up winning. And I genuinely was like excited, like genuinely like hyped and clapping in my house. The fact that Kota Ibushi had won the title. So I think you can still get moments like that.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're more fleeting and more fading.
Yeah.
As they grow up, but they're still there now and again. And the problem with Steve Austin getting fired is, for you in America, next night in Raw, it gets resolved with Vince McMahon peeing his pants. But in the UK, the Raw didn't air until Friday. So I had a whole week of thinking that Austin was fired.
He was probably filing unemployment and looking for a new job.
I know, just, heartbreaking stuff. And then after that, over here, when we got cable, Cartoon Network turned into TNT in the evening.
Wow.
And yeah, it was kind of this weird thing. It was like 7 or 8 p.m. It changed over to went from Cartoon Network to TNT. And on Friday nights, the minute it shifted to TNT, the first thing at 7 or 8 was Nitro.
Yes.
And so I'd have Nitro airing right away. And then I think directly after Nitro, they aired Thunder. And then I could catch, and then they showed Raw at midnight, on midnight. So like Friday nights, I could watch Nitro, Thunder, and Raw.
A week of wrestling in one night.
And probably up in our attic, playing video games and watching wrestling on Friday nights, and it was awesome.
That's incredible. Yeah, you get to watch 3 shows in a row. For us Americans, we were switching back and forth between Raw and Nitro.
Yeah, so I never really got the Monday Night War things because it was just I could watch everything and it was fine.
Not much of a war over there.
No, just I could enjoy all the products whenever I wanted.
Well, that's really cool. So which wrestlers caught your eyes in the beginning? Obviously, Steve Austin.
Austin did, yeah. I'm trying to think. Austin, I think the Outsiders and DDP in WCW appealed to me, and Raven appealed to me as well. Weirdly, I don't know why, but Jeff Jarrett did for a while. I still question my childhood self and that decision.
I'm surprised you admit it.
I mean, we're being open on this podcast.
Yes, we are.
But I don't know why. I asking adult me why Jeff Jarrett held appeal. Like the fact that I used in that Russo era WCW, I was rooting for him to win the world title. Something wrong with my brain.
They must have been doing something right. They got a couple of you.
I don't think I was even drinking back then, so I was a child. So can't think of the justification. But yeah, Austin was the big, and Mick Foley, and then particularly I bought both his books, and particularly the first one, I found him one of these sort of cheap bookstore things for £2, £1, maybe a year or two after it came out. And I think I read the entire book in a night.
That's
I just
awesome.
opened it.
It's a great book.
Oh, it's an awesome book, yeah. So love Foley so much.
You really became a fan more of a person at that point than the character.
Yeah, and then by that point he was also kind of almost himself as a person, as the character. He'd become that slightly more goofy Mankind. And then you had sort of joggy shorts and
the white shirt with the stripes on it.
Yeah. And those are the ones that kind of stand out immediately to ask me. I'm sure I liked Vince Russo. Again, childhood me made a lot of mistakes.
I think at that time everybody liked Russo until it was later looking back that you were like, oh, some of that stuff. Even at the time, I'm a big Val Venus fan and I'm a big Godfather fan, and then looking back, I'm like, maybe that shouldn't have been on TV.
choppy, your PP still lives with me to this day.
It's same. If anybody says that on the street, I know exactly what they're talking about. Not that it ever comes up on the street.
All the kids in the street are always yelling at each other about choppy and their PP.
Maybe back in '98.
Wow, yeah. Well, in '98, '98 was everywhere. Like, I don't know if you were the same, but you used to have like the wrestling fights on the playground.
Yeah,
like people like trying out sharpshooters and shit like that.
Anybody makes fun of you, you tell them to suck it. That's what you do.
Oh, the old sucking it. My school just banned everything back in the day. That like, so they banned the wrestling in school. They banned pogs when apparently pogs got too aggressive in my school, so we had to ban pogs and Pokemon cards because people were trading wrong.
Yeah,
and get scammed. Like, that was just anything that was slightly aggressive in my school immediately got banned.
Yeah, all the T-shirts. You couldn't wear a Stone Cold Steve Austin T-shirt at my school. Specifically Stone Cold.
We never had that freedom in the UK, where we had to wear school uniform. With
there you go.
Yeah. Not even private schools, just going to state school like I did, you still had to do that crap.
So you mentioned that you're now a fan of Japanese wrestling. You talked about who you liked early on. How did your fandom evolve after, the 2000s and WCW was absorbed?
So, like, I faded away. I always kind of kept track of things, but I faded away in terms of watching. Probably after the invasion, I think that was quite common for people.
Mm-hmm.
Cena, in later years, have come to like appreciate that, and in particular, his later run had some good stuff. But back then, it just like face Cena always winning, and it just didn't grip me. I mean, I think it's some people loved that stuff, but it just never really hooked me in.
Sure.
And so I just faded off from that for a while. And then I'm trying to remember, I think, was it around maybe when Edge cashed in Money in the Bank? I got interested again for a while and watched a bit. And then the CM Punk pipe bomb, I think I watched again for a bit. But I was kind of on and off for a long time.
Yeah, just little pieces of like maybe characters you've known getting to the forefront. You're like, okay, I got to check that out.
And, I'd probably still try and watch big things. So I might try and watch Mania and the Rumble, but that would be about it, I think, for the year, possibly SummerSlam.
Sounds like my fandom now.
And then probably about 5-6 years ago, so I moved to Korea for work. So I was working in Korea. And Korea and Japan are very close together, if you ever looked at a map. So it was about a 2-hour flight for me to get from Korea over to Tokyo.
Nice.
And so, I'd always read the story like Mick Foley's book and other places. I'd always read the stories about the Tokyo Dome and hear people talk about working the Tokyo Dome. So I just went on a random holiday to Japan, and I was like, I just got to check out this Tokyo Dome area. And I think the one thing that people don't realize if they've never been to Japan is the Tokyo Dome area is weird because it's this massive baseball stadium, but then it's also a theme park. It's like got this big it's got this big roller coaster that legitimately goes through a spa.
Wow.
Like this, so I've actually been in the spa once, and there's this like lounger area that's meant to be sort of like quiet lounging where you can just relax, and there's the nice tinkling music, and you're meant to just chill out. But every 2 minutes, a roller coaster just speeds by the window in front of you, and I've just found that fascinating.
That's awesome.
And so while I was there, I was like, okay, I wonder when. I've always heard about the big Japan events. I wonder when Wrestle Kingdom is. And so it was like January, and I'm like, oh, I'm on holiday in January. I might go to the box office and just see if there's any tickets. And so completely on a whim, I bought some tickets to go to Wrestle Kingdom for my January holiday. And when I went to the show, it was the first Kenny Omega Okada match.
Wow.
And I was there live for it. And being there live just hooked me to New Japan. That was like, you couldn't not react. That was the kind of thing where, like, I'm quite a muted person when it comes to like, I'm social, but I'm not like a performer. I don't get up and do karaoke. I don't go up and do plays or anything like that. And if I'm on a wrestling show, like, I'll enjoy it, but I don't get up and yell and chant and all that. But there was something like visceral particularly with that match, where you end up just getting out of your chair and yelling with excitement because it's just really cool shit happening. And so that kind of hooked me into New Japan. And then because I was quite close, I could start. So I ended up becoming more of a live wrestling fan. Like, I'd go and see New Japan live whenever I could. So, get over for Wrestle Kingdom, get over for Dominion. There was one show I think I managed to get. There was a match with Jericho and Evil, which was kind of like not one of their big shows, but Jericho was on it. So go over and see Jericho live. So that's kind of where the trajectory went with me. I ended up becoming like a big live wrestling fan over in Japan, and still am. Up until this year of the pandemic, I was going to Wrestle Kingdom the last 4 years.
Wow.
Live, or 4 or 5 anyway. And I plan to go again next year, all going well. And I said it to you, I think, when we were chatting earlier.
Yeah.
And I've said it to a few other people, that it's the time to go. It's like Mania weekend. Apart from it's longer. It's like for 2 weeks, the smaller Japanese companies in Korakuen Hall, which is right next door to the Tokyo Dome, do their show. So you can go, and normally 2 shows a day. So like you can go see DDT, and then you can go see All Japan, and then you can go see Noah, and then you can go see, if you like Joshi wrestling, if you like female wrestling, you've got all the Joshi promotions do shows there as well. It's just, if you've ever been sort of intrigued about going to see Japanese wrestling live, and you read about Korakuen and you read about the Dome, and you want to get that full-on experience, like that's the time to go, because you can like squeeze in so much.
Literally every style will be there for the week.
Every style,
Or
yeah.
for 2 weeks.
There's DDT. There's Big Japan, which is their like deathmatch company. I was telling Mikey about this. Like I found it fascinating because there was like one match I saw where they were handing out ponchos to like the first couple of rows.
Such a good,
because it was like a light tube death match, and I'm still not sure if it was because of the glass or because of the blood. Still not sure.
That's rough. Yeah, I don't know how I would feel sitting in the front row. I'd be so excited to score those tickets, and then they hand you a poncho, and I'd be like, maybe we should stand in the back for this one.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's these kind of comedy wrestlers in Japan. I can't remember what the names are just now, and they just come out with like buckets of water. And so, like, I noticed one time, like, all the fans sitting at the front were starting to put ponchos, or just like before their entrance, or were just like running away to like concessions and waiting for the match to be over to return,
because they knew, yeah,
they knew what was happening.
Oh, that's
but,
great.
I mean, I was sitting far back, so I was safe. But idiot me is like, why are these guys running away? That seems odd. And then you saw the entrance, and you're like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense.
So, if you had to pick your 4 favorite wrestlers all time, who would they be?
Well, that's tough. I think Foley's got to be in there.
Okay.
Foley for sure. Kenny Omega and Okada, I think both. I'd probably round that out with Ibushi.
Seeing them live, it's tough. Yeah.
And then round it out with Ibushi. I'd say, like, it's because that's the thing. It's like I connect with them more because I've seen them live. I probably, if you'd asked me this 10 years ago, it would all be WWE guys.
Yeah.
But because I've had that live connection with like Omega, Okada, Ibushi, that's the big differential for me now.
It's the same way when people talk about with music. When you see a certain band live, you just appreciate them this much more when they put on a great show.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's talk about e-fedding. How did you find this weird hobby?
10-year-old, 11-year-old Mark me, crying over Steve Austin getting fired. So it was probably around the same time we got internet in our house. Very exciting time in like 98, 99. And so I guess I was just seeing what was out there in terms of like wrestling and wrestling fandom. And the thing was, back then we had like the pay per minute internet package.
Oh,
it wasn't one of these like unlimited use, like you had to pay per minute. And I guess I found, I can't remember how I found it, but I found this Efed. I think it's still there. You can still find it. It's Super Internet Wrestling, I believe, was the name of it, and it was just this kind of thing where, much like everyone else, I done the real name thing at the start, because everyone does that.
Yeah, you started with your own name.
Yeah, because everyone does that. But I was worse, because I'm like, okay, I've got my real name, but I need to make myself seem cooler. Okay, so Stone Cold's really cool, so I want a name like kind of like Stone Cold. So what could I do? Like, okay, so not Stone Cold. What about Rock Hard?
Rock Hard Colin Gear.
Yeah. So that was, and you can still find that bio. If you Google that, it's still there.
That's amazing.
It's still there because it was Angel Fire. It wasn't GeoCities, so unfortunately, it still exists. If it was GeoCities, it'd be dead. But no, Angel Fire still lives. I couldn't tell you much about it apart from that. I think like my first match was like a hardcore title match or something like that, and you're just like posting. It's just like everyone's replying with 100 words to each other.
So at the time, this is a roleplay fed.
Yeah, it was a roleplay fed. Yeah,
and so you're cutting promos back and forth in almost a quick style, like multiples per day.
Yeah. It was like a quick back and forth, and that got me into trouble because as I mentioned earlier, the internet was by the minute, and so one of my enduring memories of this whole fiasco was I think my parents got the phone bill in, and
I had a very similar experience.
It was extraordinarily high, and it was around my birthday, and I think I felt so guilty. I was like, I gave up some of my birthday money to help pay the phone bill. Because the way it was meant to work is we had like a Coke bottle up where the internet was up in the attic, and we were meant to like put in the money we thought we'd use, but being a kid, you lose track of time. So I'm thinking, so I was like, oh yeah, no, I'm covering this. I'm putting in my £1 for 10 minutes. I'm probably spending 3 hours on it. And so, it's like, oh dear, I've spent too much time on the internet. So that was my first experience.
That's great, though. That's a memorable experience for sure. Your parents won't let you forget it. Even probably today.
Yeah, I mean, it's been discussed recently.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because it's only been recently that I've started actually talking about it at home. I did mention the fact that I was number 8 in the... number 8, was it?
Yeah, something like that. The top 100.
I was in the top 10. I was very happy with that. Particularly because I hadn't done anything for half the year. And I didn't even know what was happening, so I didn't campaign or anything. Just you messaged me out of the blue, like, hey man, you're in the top 10. I'm like, oh, cool. I mean, I'll take it. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was great.
No argument for me.
It was a fun project, and it was nice to see the high octane people turn out to vote. So
yeah, so there's a lot of high octane and a lot of defiance, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you talked about how you got into e-fedding. You used your real name to start off, and you're into roleplay feds. Where did you go from there, and how long until you found some actual success? I know you said you were on and off as a wrestling fan. Is it the same with the writing?
Yeah, I mean, I always had the habit of kind of being on and off as a writer as well. Weirdly, I quickly shifted into angle feds very early on, like 2001, 2002. Yeah. So I had a character called Phil Atkin, and basically that was just me not being a child and not knowing how to spell names properly. And so I think it was absolutely meant to be Aitken. I think I insisted for years it wasn't after the fact, but got to just reveal it on the podcast. It absolutely was. I was just like 10 years old and couldn't spell.
You just stuck with it, yeah.
Or 12 years old. But, it's interesting, though, because it made it much more easy to Google if I was trying to track anything down, because it was the only spelling of that name. So if I put Phil Atkin in quotation marks back then, I could find my old feds just to remind myself.
Did you mean? Yeah.
And so there was a message board called E-Wrestling Planet at the time, and so on E-Wrestling Planet, I think there was like a recruitment board. It was a very active board at the time. I think that was like one of the big hubs. And you know what, Mikey? I'm going to circle back because I've missed a step, and I've only realised I've missed a step by talking about this. In between that, I was still doing a roleplay thing. It was FWLNet had this big like top 100 feds it was one of these big lists in like 2000, 2001. But they also had a fed called IWO.
Okay.
Now I don't know if you remember that, but that was the fed that Ford was in. Tom Ford, high flyer. He was by the time I got there, he was like a management role of some description, like vice president of writing good words or something.
So this is even back in like 2000, and you're being introduced to Tom Ford, who is in high octane today.
Yep, 2000. Yeah, that crazy, like 21 years, 2000, 2001 for sure, like, so at least 20 years.
Yeah.
And so IWO was like the top 100 site. It was their Fed, so it was like the big Fed.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think back then it had like 3 minor leagues just because of the demand of it. Like, it had that prestige and esteem that people wanted to be in it. And so it's like, you'd have to work your way through the minor leagues. And then I guess at some point they decided to have some form of brand split, and they had like IWO White and like IWO Black, to have a race war.
Yes, much in the vein of NWO, obviously.
Have a good old race war. And so somehow, God knows how, I ended up being recruited into IWO Black. And the weird thing with IWO, well, it wasn't a board Fed. It was they posted the results. They had a really cool website. In fact, they even done radio shows even back then. But the role plays were email chains.
Oh,
so
nice.
It just went into, like, all the role plays just went into your inbox, and like you had to like CC in everyone when you were doing your own role play.
You want to know something that's wild? Is that still exists to this day?
That's crazy, man.
People still play that way.
I would have thought that would have been dead by now. That's amazing to learn. And so Ford was some form of management in IWO Black. And so because of that, I was talking to him on the AIM even back then, and chatting with him. And I was terrible because I was terrible for a very long time. And I'm sure some people would say still to this day. But it was still a good experience because I got to meet him. He was always like a cool guy. Like, he was always willing to chat. He was always willing to give feedback. He was always like kind of nice, and he really cared about IWO at the time. I'm sure he does to this day, because like he kept archives of everything. So even when all the websites shut down, he still had like old shows and used to post them on a website. Like, he bought the domain and posted on the website way after the fact. Like, and so I was like probably like lowest tier talent in that place. But it was still like fun, and it's still amazing to think, despite all that there's someone I met there
still playing today with you.
Still in contact with to this day. It's just insane to think about.
It is. There's so many circles in the game. There's so many players who were probably then a little bit older who have now, no longer playing the game. So the odds of that happening are very slim.
Yeah, and it's crazy. So that was my last RP experience for a while, because then I went into Angle for a bit. There was a place called Fret. I can't remember much about it, but I was in it. I can tell you that much, and that's where Phil Atkin became a character. It was run by a guy called Kamlesh, who was sort of, I guess, was big on the scene for a while. I think he was in a lot of the sort of the big name Feds for a bit. But like, on top of being in it, I was like a fan of e-Fedding as well. Like, I used to read other Feds results that I wasn't in. So there was a place called Action Wrestling, and it was run by Roland. Who's also in
High Octane Wrestling. What are they?
That's crazy. And I used to read their shows, and I used to love their shows. Like, I would just read through them all, like the storylines and everything like that. There was like Roland, I think, had like a lawyer character called LLB.
Yes.
Had a management guy, and I can't remember. He had like this weird, insane rich person who was in charge of the place. And then Clyde Fox was there, and then I think LLB and Clyde Fox had a feud, and there's a guy called Mike Renner, and he had characters in there. And I was never in the Fed at that point, and I was just reading it and enjoying it as a fan.
I need to interview Mike Renner, because he's been brought up probably 40 times out of 60 episodes.
Yeah, he was in IWO as well.
It's insane.
Yeah. IWO was an interesting place. They had a big show every year called Mall Brawl, where they just had a big match in the Mall of America.
Nice.
That's like pinfalls could happen anywhere kind of deal. Like, I remember like people having fights in the Snoopy store and stuff like that when I read it.
Nice.
But yeah, so I was a fan at the time, and I think I applied for Action a couple of times and got knocked back because I was shit. Fair enough. I probably wasn't very good. And it was the same with FWO was the other big one at the time. And I think I sent out like 5 applications and never got a reply to any of them.
I think we've all been there where we saw that top Fed and we're like, oh, I want to join here. And you send in the app. And then you don't hear anything back, and you're like, oh, they must not have gotten it. Let me send it again.
Yeah. There must have been a problem with the emails. It wasn't that I am complete garbage. It's an email issue.
Must have been buried. They must have not have seen it. Let's try again.
Yeah. I mean, they were probably inundated with bad applications, so I better reapply so they can see my good application.
Somewhere there's an archive of your application's probably in there of all the fun ones they love the most.
Oh God, it'll be needy as shit, I'm sure.
Well, very good. So you were there, and you started this new character. What was different between the original character that you named after yourself and this character? Did it have a certain gimmick, or was it just the name change?
So, like, I kind of always been a big fan of comedy, and like, I guess satire in particular. And even at that age, I kind of had this weird thing for satire back then. And so the initial idea behind Phil Atkin was, it was I think it was around the peak of the Triple H reign of terror, and people being like really angry about Triple H. And I was like, okay, but what if I create a character that is everything that the internet thinks Triple H is? Like, just the most obnoxious. I think he used a sledgehammer, and he was just really annoying, and like done long-winded promos and stuff like that, just like insufferable. And like that was like, it was always the intent behind him was it was like, okay, who's the hate figure of the IWC just now? I'm going to parody that in some form, and that's like Phil Atkin changed so much over the years. Like he was probably my long-term character before. I mean, he was my long-term character before Cecilworth, but Cecilworth's always been a consistent character. Well, Atkin always kind of just rotated to like, who is the hate figure? Okay, I'm just going to kind of do that.
Just kind of adapted a few times.
Yeah, and do that in a joking way. Until I think I decided that Phil Atkin towards the end of his run was just like a bitter vet who'd never got anywhere and just done promos about these young kids ruining wrestling. And every so often, even when I started in HOW, like he would feature in the role plays as a podcast host, like a bitter podcast host who hated the kids these days. And so that was Fret, where he started properly. There might have been a Fed before that. I remember a guy called Chris McCluskey, who's long gone by now, who I think I ended up co-running a Fed with before that. But I mean, this was my youth. It's all very fuzzy. And then Fret was there, and then there was some sort of drama at Action Wrestling, and everyone quit. and so suddenly I was allowed in.
Nice. Finally made it in.
So finally made it. It just took everyone quitting.
It just took an entire roster churn. Yeah.
An entire roster churn, and then they let me in. And somehow I think it was an angle Fed, and it was like a relaunch of angle Fed. And I think I ended up as champion. I could be wrong, but I think I did. I don't know how. And again, that guy Cam Lesh, who'd been running Fret, he was in that Fed with me, and I think we had the feud. And then after that kind of all fell apart. That was like one of my periods of going away for a while. Like I'll end up sometimes having like a year or two off, and then get an itch and want to do it again.
So when's the next big point that you come back into the game? The one next memorable run? You quickly mentioned in there that you joined HOW. Was that earlier on or later on?
No, I was like way later than that, because HOW was like this, because we're still like in the 2000. That was like 2002, 2003.
Oh, I gotcha.
HOW wasn't until like 2014.
Much later, yeah.
We were steps till we get there. So when I came back, I believe it was All-Star Wrestling, maybe. It was a Fed. It was run by a Scottish guy. Again, it was one of these sort of big name Feds at the time. And again, because I had a big name, I'm like, yeah, I want to join there because I'm cool and good. So I had such like a I don't know if it was like imposter syndrome thing or just like wanting to prove myself or just wanting to be liked. I always just wanted to be in big feds. Like I went through a period in those early teen years of like adding 2 years to my age just because I thought that people would take me more seriously as an adult. It's like my brain works in weird ways. It's like, no, I'm an adult, so if everyone will respect me, and that was the thing. Like I used to always have like obsessions of like trying to get into management or ownership for the same reasons. Like now people will respect me.
Meanwhile, you're probably talking down to people your age.
Yeah, like God, like
teenagers. Am I right?
I think there was one point where one of the guys I was talking to on AIM every day, because I was telling like such a lie about my life. It was like so elaborate. I was pretending that I was returning home from work every day. I was still in high school, middle school age, but in high school because like Scottish high schools run 12 to 18. But like I don't know, I had this like so for years I don't think people knew my actual age because I kept on lying about it and couldn't keep my story straight. Just because I was like, oh yeah, if I pretend I'm older, people will respect me. I'll be the adult in the room. This will fix everything. So I went to All Star with Phil Atkin again, and it was a short run, but it was good. I had a retirement match with a friend of mine, Chris McCluskey, who I had mentioned earlier. It was a cage match, and I think we both hit the floor at the same time, which, based on the way we wrote it, meant that we both had to retire. So in like 2004 or 2005, it was like, yeah, no, this is time to retire. I mean, I'm doing this interview in 2021, so I think we know how that ended up.
No, not very. Just like your most recent retarement's going to end up.
Well, sure, I'm certain. Give it like another 6 months and I'll be back. So that's the period. That period is the best recall I have of that sort of the early years. So it's kind of fuzzy, but that's the bits I remember of the early years. I couldn't tell you what happened for a good few years after that, no.
Early adult years.
Early adult years when I went to university.
I wonder why that is.
Alcohol.
At least we're being honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. So you're meant to be honest in this show, right?
That's right. I'm drinking alcohol right now, so it works out.
So one of my next memories after that was there was a fed called GCW, which is where Murr was.
Yep, previously mentioned on the show as well.
Yeah, Murr was there, and Billy and a few other guys, I think, who are maybe in Defiance these days. I can't remember. Murr and Burley for sure, I know, were there. And they kind of kept me around, and that was during my university years. So I was so on and off, and like when I posted, it was absolute garbage shit. But they were amused by me, I think, so they kind of kept me around. And like anytime I disappeared, they for some reason were happy to take me back. An error on their part.
So it's their fault you're still around.
I mean, really, it is when you think about it. It's really GCW's fault that they could tolerate the complete crap I was out doing. It's interesting because I've listened to a lot of these Efed podcasts you've done, Mikey, and everyone talks about all the great things they used to do in the past. Like I found all my old stuff. None of it's good.
It's rose-colored glasses. It just means that they weren't good either.
My past is awful. I'm not proud of any of it. So yeah, GCW, I was on and off, and at the same time I was in a fed on the F wrestling boards called NFW, and Bronk and Pete and Ford and Linz, I think, but maybe not. But quite a few of the people who are in How Today were in NFW when I was there. But again, they were main event talent, and I was opening shit tier. But I guess I have some form of adorable quality where people take pity on me because they were still despite the fact that I was atrocious, they were still happy to be my friend. And isn't that the important thing, Mikey, is friendship?
It is. That's what the hobby's all about in reality, that and creative wrestling writing. But friendship plays a big part in it, and community, and That's the reason most of us are still in it in our 30s and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, I kind of knew myself I wasn't that great, but I always enjoyed I always kind of enjoyed the community aspect more than the writing aspect. Like, I enjoyed
the banter, yeah.
Yeah, just like, you'd have the AIM group chats, or you'd have this and that. And that kind of was always my appeal. I was never in it to be particularly competitive. Like, I was never aiming for the top belts or all that. I was just kind of like, I wanted to get into a good fed with people I find friendly and cool, and kind of just hang out and chat with them. Like, that was always my attitude. Like, for a long time, I didn't have a lot of people to socialize with in my teen years, offline, shall we say. So it's different these days, but certainly back then that was the case. So, like, I was connected to all these people through e-fedding, and I find, and on top of being e-fedding, also, like, there's a website called Talk Wrestling Online for just general wrestling chat, and I met a lot of people through that as well. And it's weird because over the years, these are people like I've now met in person, or and people I'm still in contact with, and those are, to me, those are the meaningful parts of the hobby. Like, your titles and shit like that doesn't really matter. It's have you met good people, and have you, like, established good friendships and relationships with them? And like, I've now met several people in person. Pete I met in person, Mike I met in person and went on a cruise with, and his wife. So it's been that kind of experience. That's the kind of stuff I knew I wasn't that great, but I was always in it for the social element, and I think that's why I also started getting involved in the radio side of things as well, because the radio is like almost peak socialization.
Yeah, it was the next level. I mean, you could chat with people all day, but it's not the same as talking to them and hearing their voice.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's kind of where you can really build friendships. When you get to be a regular radio show, you get to do something where you're actively talking to people regularly. You find out that sometimes you talk more offline than you do online, or on air.
And I think you're a part of it as well, Mikey. Like, when we used to do, like, UTA shows, we'll probably get to UTA in a minute. But, like, when we done the radio shows, like, after the show ended, there'd still be, like, a call for, like, 2 hours, and we'd watch, like, a bad wrestling show or play video games. Or I think I remember one time, God bless Murr, he was it was during his period where he didn't have work to do. I think it was the old UTA Irish Wake, and he was shit-faced. And me and Ford were so concerned with him, we managed to convince him to fire up his PlayStation and play Rocket League with him until we felt that he was sober enough to be going to sleep.
Yeah, they were always a good time, and that's kind of how this evolved. I know when Brian and I have our little podcast and we do recording for this show, we end up talking, the recording time is 45 minutes. The talking time is 3 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly really genuinely feel like some people, I think, get into trouble because they view era wrestling and their character as, like, the extension of themselves. And so, like, their success and failures mean that they feel like they failed or they've succeeded. And so you get more drama and emotion from that, because they feel like this is a substitute for them in their real life.
Yeah.
And you kind of get that. I guess it's this outlet, isn't it, for the hobby? But I think that's where the danger comes from. While the people who are more in it for, like, the socializing and mutual interest and just wanting to enjoy what's going on, I think get a lot more out of it than the people who, like, if they lose a match, feel like they failed as a human.
Yeah. And they take it too seriously. That's how you get burnout. That's how you get blacklisted.
Yeah, I mean, me and you, I think, have seen enough death spirals over time.
Yes, many over time. So let's talk about moving on in time. You talked about your long break and taking a break, and then you come back to GCW. What kind of successes did you have in GCW?
I didn't.
No, none. Just playing the comedy character and having fun.
Yeah. When I joined Defiance for a little bit, there was a running joke. I think Billy still had the GCW archive.
Yes.
And so to upset me, he'd keep on posting links to my terrible GCW roleplays. Oh, they weren't good. Like, I guess, like, at that time I was watching, like, a lot of Adult Swim and, like, Space Ghost and Aqua Teen Hunger
Space
Force.
Ghost doesn't get enough shout outs. I'm glad you said that.
Space Ghost Coast to Coast was awesome.
It was so good. One of my favorites.
Real good. I loved it. So I used to watch a lot of the Adult Swim random stuff. So I used to like, oh, random, that's funny. Haha, I'm writing a role play called Ponies, and I'm going to write about ponies, and it's going to be really funny. It's not. It's bad. And so Billy used to link to all those terrible GCW role plays in the Defiance Skype chat.
I'm sure if you joined today, he'd do the same thing.
The wave of shame every single time he done it was washed over me. It's terrible. And it kind of the same thing, like with NFW, it was kind of the same thing. And I was still going through a phase where, I think I was still going through a phase where I was like desperate to be liked as well. And so I'd just go along with everything. Like, people would be like actively suggesting terrible ideas that were basically shitting on me. But because I just wanted people to like me, I'm like, yeah, that sounds cool. And like, I'd never argue or fight or anything. Like, oh no, I don't want any drama. In fact, I think I was listening to an old like Efed Gorillas podcast a while ago because I was basically trying to put together my life for listening to old radio shows. I remember like a direct quote from me going like, oh, I don't like drama. I don't get into drama. Then I became like a big arsehole when I got to HW. So, times change. So GCW and NFW were more, I guess, social experiences. NFW, again, it was more, I think I was taken on in pity and almost to be laughed at. I can look back at that and kind of say that now. I think that was like the reality. I was chatting with the Fed head a lot on AIM, and he was always just suggesting like ridiculous things from the character to do. Like I think having like a Viking mother and like all this kind of stuff, and I'd go, yeah, sure, I'll write that. Yeah, sure. Please like me. I just didn't have. I still wasn't at that stage of my life where I had much of a sense of myself. And so it's just like, yeah, sure, if this will make you like me, I'll take this thing. And so those were kind of like the GCW, NFW years were just, I met a lot of people from it and, got involved in a few things off the back of it. But I couldn't say that those were particularly successful times where I was outputting my best writing ever.
Well, it sounds like you said, it was more social time for you. You became friends with a lot of people. You got to know a lot of people, and probably because of the attitude you were displaying, like whatever. Yeah, and the one thing I've always done, it doesn't matter what Fed I've been in. As I said, I'm always a fan as well, and I think that still carries on to this day. Is like I will read through the entire show and I will give thorough feedback on the show. Like that's one thing I've always carried on. Like no matter how I felt personally, like where I've been emotionally or where I've been as a writer. One of the things I've always liked to do is when I can and when I feel like I have the time to do it is going through the whole show and giving feedback, because I don't think that happens too often. And, people have put the work in, and I've always thought it's nice for people to be recognized for the work they've put in, good or bad, and it's one person's opinion, but at least then I know that they feel like someone's reading their work. They're not just operating in the void, and that's always one thing that I've tried to do with whatever Fed I've been involved with. And it's very not, I'm going to say noble, but I know that's probably not your intent, but that everybody in e-Fedding wants to know, hey, someone's reading what I'm writing. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think, it's just nice to have that acknowledgement that, people are actually interested in what I'm doing and people want to comment on it, good or bad, people are commenting on it. Some people will get their back up if they don't agree with it. Yeah. And of course that's their choice, but that's one thing I've always been cautious about. It's this is just my read of it. That that should be irrelevant to you. Yeah. I'm reading your stuff. You're right. You're writing for the Fed head. Yeah. That's always the case. You're always writing for the Fed head. That's who's going to decide where you win or lose. So after the NFW run, where do you end up next? So NFW was an interesting one. So NFW is around the same time I got involved with being a co-host on the Efed Gorillas podcast. Yep. So I think that's my second NFW run. So I think I joined NFW around 2007, maybe till 2009. Went away for a bit, like I have done over the years. Came back maybe 2011, 2010. There was a big ultra title tournament going on F Wrestling, like a big interfed thing.
That I came to the board too late to join it, but I was reading it and following it. And then I remember, they were advertising Efed Gorillas, and they said, Tom Ford is hosting or co-hosting or whatever. And I'm like, oh, Ford, I've known Ford for back then. Oh, I've known Ford for 10 years now. So I'm like, you know what, I might actually call into this because I've always kind of loved radio as well. Like, that's the thing. Like, that's been my second interest in life alongside wrestling in terms of hobbies. I used to listen to a lot of like talk radio with my dad. Like, we'd stay up late and listen to like the shows where you'd have the psychic on and people would be calling them and she'd spout bullshit, or the guys talking about aliens or the conspiracy theories. And in the UK, when wrestling was really big back in like 2000, 2001, TalkSport, which was like the national network for sports talk, had a wrestling-based show like every Saturday night. It was like 7 till 9 or 8 till 10. I can't remember what it was. And so, like, I would call in as a kid with my stupid theories. Like, I think WCW are going to win the invasion because that's more interesting because I don't understand how booking works. And so I'd always had that interest in radio as well. And so, like, this idea to, like, Ford's on the show and I like radio. So maybe I'll call in and see. And so I think I called in and sort of chatted away. And then they had some sort of contest where they were giving away a Chris Candido action figure. So I recorded like a ridiculous promo about why I deserved a Chris Candido action figure. And then from that, I kind of just became a co-host and ended up doing a show with Ford and Pete every Thursday for quite a while.
Did you win the action figure?
Apparently I did, but it never got sent to me. And
that's bullshit.
That is why Ernie is the worst.
Well, that's cool. That's how you got into it, and that's how you instantly almost became a co-host immediately after that.
Yeah, it was reconnecting with a person that I hadn't spoken to in a couple of years, which was sort of cool in and of itself. But then having that sort of experience where then I was able to do that every week. I mean, I didn't know Pete by that point, but I got to know Pete very quickly and really enjoyed talking to him as well, and thought that the three of us had like a really cool show dynamic. And then the other thing that happened during that time was, and I personally enjoyed it, was like, so I guess we'd done the show on the Thursday. So every Friday, I'd get these AIM messages from Brunk, Dan Ryan's handler, where he was listening to the show and just giving me his live feedback of how he thought it was with that. In typical Brunk fashion, and I love that, and that got me talking to Brunk more as well, and building up a friendship with him. So these kind of little domino effects and knock-ons are always cool.
He still does that to this day with this radio show. Whenever one of his friends are on, he gives me live feedback as he listens.
He's a great dude.
He is.
So that's how I got started with doing the Efed Gorilla stuff, and this ties back into the NFW story because NFW went through like a changeover of people who were running it, and I was on the Efed Gorillas live with Ford and Pete one night, and I think it was very controversial. They're making some changes. I think they posted something they called the manifesto, and the manifesto was basically, you can role play, but we'll use your characters however we want. Love Fedheads. And, there was a big conversation. Obviously, that's going to be a big conversation on a e-wrestling talk show podcast. Like, is this the right thing to do? No, is the answer. But, it's going to be a conversation. And while we're talking about NFW, like Ford brought up the NFW website and went, "Oh, Colin, you're not on the roster page anymore." What do you mean I'm not on the roster page? He's like, yeah, no, you've been taken off the roster page. He'd just done match writing for their like last big event. Why am I? And they just taken me off without any conversation. And so that was how my run in NFW ended.
You got the manifesto.
Got the manifesto, and then they just took me off took me off the roster without even the courtesy of telling me. And so that's why I've never. Lots of people love NFW, and I think they're great writers in NFW. And I, again, as a fan of just reading stuff, they were great shows and really entertaining to read. So as someone who enjoyed reading the shows, I had a great experience. But as someone who was a handler and wasn't, I guess, one of their top guys, I feel like, you ended up just feeling like an afterthought to the point where they just felt like they could get rid of you whenever they wanted. Mm-hmm. So I kind of had that mixed emotion at the time. Like, I liked their output, but I didn't like my treatment. And so you kind of have to weigh that up at the same time. And so, yeah, no, it wasn't. Those years weren't successful years. But the flip side of that was that I got to know a lot of people through that. So although the handling side wasn't successful, the social side was really nice.
And that's what that's what became the most important part of the hobby to you moving forward.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, for sure. Like that's what I cared about back then. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess even when I've hit success, it's still been the part I care about.
Yep. So after the NFW run, where do we end up next?
After the NFW run, so one of the things I've never been afraid to is like just seeing what's happening in other communities and seeing if there's like anything cool going on. I've never been that pretentious to be like, board fed, no thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly if like I read stuff and I think it's kind of cool. So I found this fed called Action Pro Wrestling, I think it was, APW. It had Jason Cash in it and a few other people. I think the guy Perry, who runs 4CW or ran 4CW, he was in it as a handler at the time. And I think that's actually like when APW closed, I think like a lot of the APW handlers shifted over to 4CW and sort of built up that foundation. Just to give you a boring history lesson on Efed. So Action was where I still had Phil Atkin at the time. I still hadn't kind of went all in on Cecilworth, and but that's where I'd kind of that's the point where I'd kind of made Phil a bitter vet, and that was kind of his gimmick. And so he was no longer just like a random what does the internet hate? I'm just going to write about that. I'd got to the point where I wanted to actually make a character. And so that was kind of one of the first things where, I started creating a story and a narrative around him and built it up. And then I was like, oh, when I do that, I seem to have success. Maybe I should keep doing that instead of just thinking I'm funny and amusing myself and literally no one else. And so that was like my experience with APW, was kind of just sort of getting back into the groove and really thinking more about like developing a consistent narrative for a character. That sounds so fucking pretentious.
I think it takes a little bit of maturity to finally realize a full gimmick, a full fleshed out character.
For sure. And I had a great time in APW. I learned a lot. I was still doing Efed Gorillas at the time. I think I ended up doing a few shows where we done like APW specials where like I hosted and got people from APW on to talk about the Fed. That was a really enjoyable time. I really enjoyed my time there. That ended up closing, because inevitably, people get busy. Fed heads, can't necessarily shoulder the responsibility for Fed for a long period of time. And on the F wrestling boards at the same time, I'm trying to remember Brunk's Fed's name.
Empire Pro Wrestling.
Empire. Thank you. You've interviewed enough people you actually probably remember which things than I do, and I was in it. So around the same time, they were doing like a tag team tournament, and so I'd had this manager character kind of floating in the background called Dirk Dickwood for ages. And that basically stems from the fact that my brother's called Derek, and I used to annoy him by calling him Dirk. That's the long and short of where that name comes from.
Easy enough.
And Dickwood, because I used to like the Monkey Island video games growing up, and so Guybrush Threepwood somehow turned into my head to Dirk Dickwood. Of course, makes perfect sense. So they had the tag team tournament. So I had the manager character, so then I was kind of creating a team around that. So that's where Cecilworth, was sort of this rich, affluent idiot and this like tall, mute guy who simply went by Hank. That's the entire Hank. And so they were a tag team managed by Dirk Dickwood, and it was Dirk Dickwood Presents. And I signed up for this tag tournament, like this King of the Cage. That's what it's called. King of the Cage tag team tournament was happening in Empire. Because it just seemed fun. It seemed like a fun idea. And so that's where kind of Cecilworth started becoming a thing. So Phil was still there. He was kind of in Action doing his thing. and then I was doing sort of developing Cecilworth in Empire at the same time. But again, he was more the backseat to the manager character. Like I've at that time I must have been enamored by managers, and so wanting to do like the manager does the promo. Like I was a big fan of managers back in the day. You know, your Bobby Heenans, your Dangerous Alliance,
Yes.
Paul Heyman's. So of course, like I started watching in '98, but I went back and watched a lot of stuff back after that. So, like I used to buy like tape trades. Like I'd get the Cactus Jack WCW compilation videotape that I'd order from a tape trader for one of those super long 6-hour VHSs.
Yes, it would be two or three VHS set.
Yeah, so like I used to have that back in the day, but I loved the manager character, so I went the right with a manager character, and so Cecilworth wasn't quite fleshed out at all. But I had a great time in Empire, and I think I won that tournament. But inevitably, and that was the other problem I always had, is like once I'd achieved something, I got bored and distracted. So like, oh, I won. All right, well,
maybe I'll see if I can win somewhere else. Yeah.
Oh, I'll go somewhere else now. And that was always the problem I ran into as a handler back there. It was like, okay, I've achieved. Now what? I guess I'll stop. And so that was kind of going on at the same time. And then there was a Fed called, God, I can't remember what it was called now. It was a guy called Voss, a cool guy who has 500 children, I believe, these days. Like anytime I used to speak to him where he disappeared for a while, I was like, yeah, no, I've just had a kid. So I assume probably around 1,000 children at this point. It was Intergalactic Wrestling, Intergalactic Championship Wrestling, and it was based off Shikara. It was themed in Shikara style. And I started watching Shikara, and again from sort of the tape trader dimension. So I'm like, oh yeah, I want to get into the Shikara Fed. So I brought in like the sort of that bitter hardened vet Phil Atkin character into Intergalactic at the time as well, and had a run there, and that was again really enjoyable because the shows were enjoyable to read. Particularly if you're like a Shikara fan, you could really get the sense of it. It was the same thing, like you'd have like rotating cast of commentators of all the different characters in the Fed as well. Like it really felt like you'd be watching one of those shows, and so that was all kind of happening at the same time. So it was like Empire Action and Intergalactic were all happening around 2012. And so this is where I'm sure you're wondering where that 2012 F Wrestling Handler of the Year question comes from. And so those three things were all happening around the same time. And that was kind of the point where I was still really enjoying the social side, but I was also starting to get into the writing side of things as well, and actually thinking about character development and what I don't want to do with my characters, and not just posting up a role play called Ponies and saying random lol. I'd moved beyond that essentially, along I guess maturity, because being an adult and things. So that was sort of the big shift back then. But it was all really, again, great people. Voss was running Intergalactic, and he was a lovely guy. Brunt was running Empire, great dude. There was a guy called Jeff running Action, and he was all approachable. And Action had a very social group, and they had like one of those embedded chat rooms that people would go into for pay-per-views. So you had the community and the social side of things as well. So both of them were running pretty well for a while, and it was thoroughly enjoyable, Mikey.
It sounds like it, and not only that, but you achieved Handler of the Year.
Well, controversial. I don't know. Should we talk about that now or wait till the question?
No, go ahead. Hit it now.
So that was around the time that Ultra title thing was going on as well, and so they had like the poll of like best handler of the year or whatever. And I it's that stupid thing that was an honor just to be nominated. But genuinely by that point, because I thought I'd sucked shit for so many years, the fact that I could even be recognized as being half decent was incredibly meaningful to me. And I think I got a good, decent handful of votes at the time as well, but I didn't win, obviously. But it was the guy who'd won the Ultra title, and I can't remember who that was now. It's gone in my head. He won. And there was a prize, there's a cash prize for winning the Ultra title. And so I think I made like a stupid post in the thread saying, I don't think he should win because he's a professional Efeder because he gets money from it. I think this award should only recognise amateurs.
So by default, it fell to you.
Unofficially,
yeah.
One of the admins of the site decided that they were going to edit the poll, and I think gave me 999,999 votes, while everyone else got 0, which made me the F-Wrestler Handler of the Year 2012 by a landslide margin.
I love it. And I've heard that a million times from Pete before, and never knew the context, so it was nice to finally get the context.
Finally filled in the blanks for you.
Yeah. So after 2012, where do we go from there?
So 2013, I don't know. That's 2013 ? I don't know if I was handling. I don't know if it was another one of my years out. Should have been both. Could have been either. Don't know. 2014, no, that's where it becomes. This is where things become a little bit more solid, and I don't start talking in vagaries because 2014 is when I joined High Octane for the first time.
There you go. How did you find High Octane?
I think maybe it was an advertisement post on F-Wrestling, because I was on F-Wrestling, the F-Wrestling board a lot back then. So I think it might have been an advertisement post on F-Wrestling. And so I went onto F-Wrestling one day and maybe saw an advertisement for how, went onto the website, and as Lee was talking about in his interview, he takes a lot of care in his website presentation and like, making sure it looks professional and trying to draw people in through the level of professionalism on the website. So I was one of those people. I looked at that and went, oh, that website looks really cool. And I was I had some downtime. So I was like, on a whim, I fired off an application with Cecilworth. So by that point, I'm like, I kind of just want to try, like, Phil, as I've said to many people, have asked, what happened to Phil? I've insisted that he's dead in a ditch. One day he might get out of that ditch, but I doubt it.
But he's been officially dead since 2014.
Around then, yeah. He'll never get out of that ditch. It was a deep ditch. And I was kind of like, and Cecilworth, and I was also getting into sort of my more political mindset and sensibility. So like having this sort of rich aristocratic fuckwit that I could just play around with and like mock all the things that I saw as the ills of society with was quite appealing. And so like I ended up running with that when I applied to HOW, but I was still manager obsessed back then as well. So even though Cecilworth kind of was still an idea, it was essentially the character was still Dirk Dickwood, the old school manager type. He was still there as he was still doing the promos. He was still doing the interview sections of the RPs and all that. And so that's how I started with HOW. I think this is the thing I was trying to remember just before the call. My first match there, I can't remember which way around it was. My first match there was either with Brian Hollywood, and I won, and Noah Hansen ran in at the end to beat me up because Lee doesn't want anyone to enjoy their victories. Or it was vice versa. My first match was against Hansen, and Brian Hollywood ran out to beat me up, which I believe built the foundations of, as we know, one of wrestling's greatest stables, Sex and Money.
So you joined High Octane, you found it through F-Wrestling, and you're back into roleplay fedding again.
I've been doing that for a little while. Yeah, I kind of went in the reverse of what most people do. Like most people seem to start in roleplay feds.
Yeah, for a long time, and then go to Angle.
For a long time, and then go to Angle. And I spent years and years in Angles, and then shifted to roleplays.
Yes, so you're in High Octane Wrestling. And what did you think of the High Octane style? Had you heard anything about their reputation prior of maybe killing characters off?
I never see. That's the one thing I've never really bothered myself much with like Fed reps insofar as like I always feel like
if someone says something, you brush it off.
Yeah, like I'll find it myself. Like I'll go there, and if I enjoy it, great. If it's what people revert it to be, I'll leave. Yeah. That's always going to be my mindset. Like, if it's crap, then I'm not going to stick around because it's crap.
But you're not going to judge a book based on what somebody else said.
No. So I didn't really go in with that much of a preconceived notion of it, apart from I'll just see how this goes. And
good.
So I won my first match. So obviously I stayed around because ego in it. Love a bit of ego. And so I guess Lee put me in the tag division with a guy called David Black off the back of the Sex and Money tag team interference. And one of the things I always remember, because I didn't know Mike back then, and so it was maybe a couple of weeks after I joined the Fed, they were doing one of the radio shows, the horrors, and I was listening to it live, and they were discussing me, and that was kind of exciting, because it's always a little bit exciting when that happens.
Sure.
And it was Mike having an in-depth discussion with Lee about whether a manager character should count towards the roleplay score.
Oh,
because it's not the character doing it; it's the manager doing it. So should that count or not? And as well, you probably know by this point that I only realised it way after the fact that was just very typical Mike politicking going on, because I didn't realise at the time, but it must have been like, you feel, I don't know if threaten's the right word, but obviously like seeing like someone come in fresh who might have some talent, and so like trying to like.
Well, he's good. Don't get me wrong, but yeah.
But it's the manager, it's not him. So he'd really, in our scoring system, should that really work? So that was one of my first.
Your introduction to Mike, yeah.
We've become great friends since, and even then, I didn't actually even think anything of it at the time. It was only after I kind of got to know Mike more that I realised what he was doing with that call or with that radio show. So I was in the tag division with a guy called David Black, and it was decent enough. It was a good time. But around the same time, I was moving to Korea for the first time. So that's about 2014 was when I moved to Korea for work for the first time. And when you're moving country and things like that, it gets hectic. So around, I think, September, October time, I took a little bit of time off to get settled in my new country. And so I think we just won the tag titles, or maybe I think we just won the tag titles. And the next show we were booked against Mike and Jace Parker Davidson, who were like the big stable. They were like the two big champions. They were the Icon and world champion at the time. So it was the tag champion.
Lee likes to do that, doesn't he? He likes to put the tag champions against the other champions.
Yeah. I can't think of when that's happened, Mikey.
Yeah, I can't either.
Can't think of any time recently where that could have happened.
Fucker.
Oh, don't worry. I was at the other side of it once.
Well, at least I know what goes around comes around. Someday, if I pick up another title, I get to face the tag champions.
That's how it works. I don't think I got a role play up because I think that was literally the week I was moving, and I was hoping to, but it just didn't work out. And so me and Lee were talking, and I think we agreed I'll take a little bit of time off, and got written out for that match. So it was like Jason Mike took out Cecilworth and injured him for a long time. So like Mike had managed to write off Cecilworth for a good long time, which is interesting considering where those two characters are at now in terms of their friendship. But in one of their very first interactions,
he put him out. He injured him, maimed him.
He killed the man, and maimed him. And so I took a little bit of time out. I came back around Christmas time, 2014 going into 2015, when I'd been settled more. Had a big feud with Jace over that initial writing out. He was still the Icon champion. So that led up to, I believe, the March to Glory match that year, where I think Jace was on what people called the Reign of Terror at that time, maybe like 9-10 months undefeated. He had the LSD and Icon championships at the same time. And HOW at that time had like a money system where you could earn money, like fake cash, one of these betting system things, and you could go and book match stipulations. And so I think I bought myself an Icon title match to go against Jace at March to Glory. But when I came back, I wasn't very good because I was still shaking up the rust. So I kept on losing matches. And so I think like Lee messaged me one day. He's like, "Hey man, I can't book this pay-per-view match if you keep losing. Oh, by the way, you've got Mike next week."
Good luck.
And I'm like, good luck. I'm like, holy crap, I got Mike. And they're like, that's like Lee's just potentially trying to write off this match. Now he has no faith in it. And weirdly with that was the first time that me and Mike spoke on a call to like discuss ideas. Like we ended up discussing our role plays together.
Against each other, yeah.
Yeah, like we worked together on our role plays against each other. And and I ended up winning. So thanks, Mike. Thanks for your help.
Which would go on to almost become a theme in High Octane, because I don't know how many times over the last year working there I've had either my opponent reach out to me or I've reached out to my opponent and said, "Hey, let's work something out to where we can get some hype going."
Well, absolutely. Like it's so common in HOW. Like, oh no, it is, because HOW's got two things going on. It's competitive, but people are wrestling fans who want to tell a good story.
Yep.
So both of those things are going on at the same time. So yes, you want to be the better writer, but you also want to be the better writer while telling a good story. And so you get into this weird space where you'll still constantly be in contact with your opponents, even though you know at the end of the day you're still going to be writing against them.
Yep. It's nice. It's a twist, because you expect a highly competitive Fed, one of the better Feds out there, to be more competitive and less cohesive, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Like it's people. I don't think people kind of realize that about how, because of some of the rep is like, once you're in there, like people work with whoever. Like people want to work. People want to discuss it. Like people still have that idea that it's an aggressive place, but it's in the vast. There's some qualifiers, but the vast majority of the time, it's not that at all.
No, and I've come to realize that as well. So that's the first time you beat Mike. Talk about how you've owned him over the years.
It's just it's just a constant. So I beat Mike, which meant that I was allowed my pay-per-view match with Jace. That was going to get cancelled.
It's a hell of a qualifier.
Tell me about it. Like, it's basically the two biggest guys in how that I was going back to back against. And so that became a 2 out of 3 falls match, where the first fall won the LSD champion, and then the overall winner would get the Icon championship. And it was like, I think it was the way Lee had judged it. It was back in those crazy times of HOW where it's like 7 role plays for a pay-per-view. God knows how anyone done that. And then they talk about like the old days where people were doing like 10. Like, what was wrong with people back then?
I couldn't do it. I have a hard time with 2 these days.
I have a hard time writing words these days, which is why I don't. So that was so we had the 7. So I think it's like the first 3 role plays would decide the LSD, and then the overall score would decide the Icon. And I ended up winning the Icon out of that match, and that was the first time Jace had a loss in 9 or 10 months. That was very exciting for me.
Big deal, yeah.
Yeah, that's like, particularly for a guy who had been garbage from 1999 to 2015. As a guy who was just there to hang out and have friends. Finally actually competing was actually, quite exciting for me.
Absolutely, yeah.
So off the back of that, so that was March, because it was March to Glory, yeah, so that was in March. And what immediately followed was one of my first falling outs with Lee. Because he insists it was miscommunication. I think he was just being a dick and stand by it. But by that point, I was in Korea. I had a pretty good job, and my vacation time lined up with WrestleMania. And so, being like a working class Scottish kid, who'd have a 2-week holiday in a caravan if he was lucky back in the day. The idea of like going to America was like out of the question, and like going to see a WWE show was out of the question. In America, I think I was very lucky to go and see like a SmackDown house show where JBL announced that some Fox News lady was going to be their new backstage interviewer, and God knows why they decided to announce that in Glasgow of all places on a house show. Now that I think about that, it's all the more befuddling. The only other time I went to live wrestling in Glasgow was when WWA was a thing. So it was before TNA and after WCW had closed. There was WWE for a short period where like a lot of the guys went over. So you had like Road Dogg and Lex Luger and Bret Hart and Jeff Jarrett and Juventud and all that group working for a company called WWA. And they'd done a show in Disco Inferno and Conan, and they'd done it, and Jeremy Borash. And why I just said those three is because
the names don't stop. Yeah, no.
Why I mentioned those three was because they had the bright idea of piping in the commentary.
Oh no.
To the arena. So like the entire night you could hear the commentary while you were watching. So I mean so the crowd is infinitely quieter because everyone's
Because
just
they're trying to listen, yeah.
they're just watching the show. They're listening to the commentary and watching the show. So there's like no crowd noise whatsoever. So that was like my first ever live wrestling show, and it was a weird experience. So you know that's about as much as I've managed to go and see live. But you know, I'd got to the place where my holidays had lined up, and I was making enough money that I was finally going to, you know, fulfill that childhood dream, and I went to WrestleMania. So it was I think it was 31. It was the one with the play button. You know, it's the one in Silicon Valley with the Terminator kind of theme to it. And Triple H had his Terminator entrance. That
yes.
Was, it was Triple H Sting. That was that show. That was a weird match. And it was kind of cool to be there live for it, no, because it's like all your childhood comes out in one match. You know, you've got DX and NWO running out.
Yeah.
So as a live fan, that was kind of cool. Sting lost, which was confusing, but you know, the Triple H match. And so I managed to get over there, and I told Lee, I'm going to WrestleMania this weekend. I'm not going to be able to be booked. And then he booked me on like a title defense.
Of course.
I'm like, anger. So there was a lot of ill will. And then I was, I think, flying back, or I was up late, and he was doing a radio show, and he was like ripping on me about how I just wasn't making the effort to roleplay. And I got so angry. I got so like, and at the time, like Ben Halcombe was kind of floating around on sidelines. And so he was like, just quit, you know, just bring the Icon title to UTA. Just quit and bring the Icon title. You know, he's messing you around, man. So like Ben's whispering in my ear, trying to like fire me up even more. And it's like, then Ben was like sending me like photoshops of like the Cecilworth poser putting like the Icon Championship in a bin as if he was Medusa back in like WCW days. And so
that sounds like Ben.
Yeah, it's Ben. That's Ben to a T. So me and Lee had a little bit of ill will from that, but for some reason I'd still decided. Like I started, so I didn't have a laptop with me. I only had like my iPad Mini, and so I ended up writing these 2 role plays in my iPad Mini while I was like flying back to Korea, and I hadn't had any sleep because I was really annoyed about the whole situation. So by the time my flight finished, I was so annoyed and everything, and so I ended up with a massive migraine, and for the only time in my life, threw up at the end of a flight because I was just so I was just so irritated about the whole thing. And then like I got a taxi back, and I was still writing the roleplay, and I think I retained. But by that point, like there was a little bit of friction there because we're both children. So none of, and I think the other problem with me and Lee is like we're both managers in our jobs, and so we both think we're in charge when we're in conversations, and so we've got that little bit of toing and froing. And so that was like our first proper fight where we'd had probably some degree of falling out. But I retained in that match. And then I couldn't even tell you what happened, but some kind of drama went down, and I ended up in UTA. That's like the very brief story there.
That's the quick version,
yeah. Some drama happened. I can't remember. I do remember I was very annoyed with Lee, and so I wrote a role play where Cecilworth got shot in the head at the end of it. And then Cecilworth was on the card that week in a match against Brian Hollywood and won the match just being a corpse. So just for all of you Efed podcast fans, Brian Hollywood is not good enough to beat a corpse.
He lost to a dead man, yeah.
He's lost to a corpse.
And the machine was born.
And the machine was born, yeah. So I think Sector and Mike were already over there.
Yeah.
So I think Mike had already had his falling out. Sector had already had his falling out. And so I followed suit. And we came over to UTA. And then like Lee, I think, was going to try and do one of the famed HOW murders or deaths with Cecilworth. Because I still had the Icon Championship at that time. And me and Mike, being children on Twitter, were like, and that's where Utah was born, because it's like, well, Cecilworth won't be in town, he'll be in Utah. He'll be in Salt Lake City. And I think we were just so annoying with it that Lee scrapped the plans to do like the murder angle. And so I think just handed the belt to Tara, Michael Davison. Lee just came out and went, "You're the champion now." Like that's how Cecilworth got written out of HOW the first time when I moved over to UTA. And then, I don't think I role played in UTA for very long. I ended up being there mostly for the social.
Yeah.
The machine was kind of a thing, but I was always kind of in the back. And then I done some staff stuff. I was doing proofreading for a while. I was on the secret staff Skype group that for some reason was me, Ben, and the Crimson Lord. Because that's obviously the perfect staff you need for a Fed.
Shout out to Scott. He's a powerhouse writer, but I don't know about him on staff, buddy.
No, that was a secret staff Skype chat, and it was the three of us. Sure. But UTA was that's where, I met and made friends with a lot of people. Like, me and Mur had been in GCW, but we never really connected. We never really chatted that much. It wasn't until he came into UTA and we started doing those radio shows, that just those complete messes that they were, that I got to know him well. And that's where, I got to know you. But for some reason, you thought that I hated you or something. I still don't quite understand where
the whole story. Here's the long story short. I was with Will, and Will didn't like you, and so you guys didn't like Will because he wouldn't talk much in public chat. And so, long story short, I was just trying to back my guy.
That's fair enough. And with Will, it's weird because he hated Mike.
Yes, that's what it came down to. It was Mike and Will. And we were just accessories.
And we were just accessories. And I always, that's one thing I've always tried to do as best I can, is be as friendly as I can with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So the Chris Ross story, with the combine harvester and him wanting me to die under a tractor. The second part of that story that people don't know is I genuinely made the effort to hit him up afterwards and talk to him and understand why the anger was there and what the problem was, and he would keep yelling at me to fuck off, but I wouldn't give up and just man, I just I've always got the attitude I don't like burning bridges and I don't like having enemies, and so as best I can I always try and nip things in the bud. So I ended up in this weird thing where Will was kind of friendly with me, and I think I ended up being Facebook friends with him and stuff like that, but then we never really chatted because there's this brutal enemy thing going on in UTA.
Today Will's got no problems with anybody, and he's friendly as all get out. I think it was just a thing where he was the champion. I was in my first prominent role, so I was trying to stick to it. And I just how role play feds get, emotions get involved.
For sure. And I think that's why I fell out of role playing in UTA so quickly, is I just didn't have the energy for the drama. So I'm I'll hang around in the Skype chat, I'll do the radio shows, I'll proofread the shows for Ben.
I hated Mur too the first time, and then now we're best friends. So,
well, the thing that I've always known about Mur is that he has absolutely no place in this hobby.
He is a bastard. I've always heard that.
He's just no place at all.
He's a fishmonger? Is that it?
Well, that was a GCW story. Yeah.
And you're the stabber, if I remember right.
Well, that's what Glasgow's known for. Yeah. GCW used to have a radio show as well, and I think it was Murray and a guy called Chris Bagwell. And Chris Bagwell always done the radio show drinking red wine, putting ice in it, which offended me to the point that I called him annoyed by the fact that he put ice in wine. And I think Murray tried to cut me off at one point, and I said, "Shut up, you fishmonger." and that's where that one stemmed from. In the one call that I ever made into GCW radio, I yelled at Chris Bagwell for putting ice in his wine and called Murray a fishmonger because I'm a lovely man.
Yeah, I've always heard Mur tell that joke as well, and I wanted to bring that one up too.
Who puts ice in red wine? White wine I get. White wine I can justify because white wine's often chilled. So putting icing something that's chilled, I get. Red wine, no. The bizarre maniac does that.
I put ice in my tequila, but that's just me.
I've heard that tequila can make you happy.
Oh, I'm very happy right now. So,
I'm glad you're happy.
So your UTA run kind of came to a close there. You kind of ended up more in a staff role than a handler role.
Yes, I ended up being staff there, and then Cecilworth, I think, just became like NPC essentially. He was like a general manager, as far as I recall, that people could use for segments. And because I'm never really that fussy or protective, like anyone would hit me up going, I think I'm going to do a segment where Cecilworth pulls down his trousers and pees in the ground. Sure, sounds great. Just go for it. But like I just, so he was a general manager NPC, and that kind of. But again, I was there for the social side and doing the radio shows, and that's why I remember most about UTA was those radio shows. Like they were, particularly when it's like you and
off the chains.
Yeah, they were insane, but they were a lot of fun. Like,
so much fun. That's why. I mean, between Efed Gorillas, between the EW After Party, between UTA Radio, that's why I'm here today, is because those shows were so much fun and they inspired me to do this.
Yeah, and EW After Party, that was a good time. Like there had been some sort of falling out. I think Ernie went through one of his weird periods, as he's wont to do, and started messing over Ford. And I still to this day don't understand how anyone could mess over Ford. As one of the loveliest humans I've ever known. And so obviously I took Ford's side in that one. So we'd created the EW After Party to air after UTA Radio, where we just played like stupidly like Wheel of Fortune with like e-wrestling catchphrases.
I'd been on there as a guest, I think, once or twice, and I was hammered both times, and I just remember having a blast.
It's because, that's the thing, because people got hammered during UTA Radio.
Yes.
So by the time the after party rolled around,
you were just sloshed.
It was just a drunken mess. And meanwhile, I was the only sober guy because I was in Korea by that point. So it's like 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning.
And you're dealing with all these drunks.
And I'm just dealing with the drunks. And the only time that I got drunk was when UTA closed and we had that Irish Wake show.
The Wake, yes.
Where everyone got smashed out of their face.
So much fun.
And
we should open UTA just to close it and drink again.
Just close it and drink again, yeah. And I decided to get really drunk with everyone else, which ran into the problem where I was meant to have a date that day, and I had to send her a text to cancel because I was too day drunk to be able to go outside.
Terrific.
So UTA was a fun social time, and that led to me creating drama that I was unaware of, because Ben had called me in to like co-host the year-end awards, and so you're going through all the categories, and Ben's shouting them out and all that kind of stuff, and I think the category was most interesting, and Chris Ross's character of Zell Jackson was nominated in the most interesting character, and I believe I said that he's not interesting, he's just foreign. And I had it's just me being me, You're
just riffing.
I'm quite dry in my humor. Like I never honestly, if anyone's ever pissed off by anything, I say please talk to me because I don't mean it. Like
and you're the first to reach out. Yeah.
Yeah, I reach out and I'm very happy to apologize. Like I acknowledge, like I think I'm just being funny, but if it I try my best to be careful with that kind of stuff. But I was just unaware, because Chris Ross never reached out to me. So he'd been stewing on this for weeks, and I had no idea that he was really, really angry about the fact that I said that Lizelle Jackson was just foreign. And I stand by that comment to this day. He was just foreign. And so we were doing a UTA radio one day, and Murr, I think, thought it would be funny to call Chris Ross in, even when he didn't want to be on the call. And he kept hanging up. And eventually got to the heart of the matter is he refused to be on the call if I was on the call. And so I was just sitting there going, well, why what, me? What have I done to you? And so over time, as I said earlier, I was hitting them up, what's the problem? As you said, I always try and reach out if I know there's a problem. I fuck off. I'm like, but man, just talk to me. No, fuck off. What's going on? It's like, you called my character foreign. I'm like, okay, sorry. I'm sorry that, I didn't, I thought I was being funny. I didn't realize I'd upset you. And that was what it was. He just was so angry over it. That was the big thing. But my favorite thing about that was when he was really angry and just typing out of anger, he typed the phrase, "I want Colin to die under a tractor." And so Murr being Murr decided, I think, to start off the next UTA radio with the hit song "Combine Harvester" by the Worshippers.
Classic. Now it's a joke that still lives to this day.
Oh yeah, it's been one of the few enduring jokes that I think we've had between like HOW and UTA.
It's great. So your UTA run came to a close with everybody else because the UTA came to a close.
I got so angry about that as well because I just came back. Like I wrote 2 role plays because there was an ace in the hole match, like the money in the back briefcase thing. And I thought I'd put up like 2 pretty solid role plays and would be in contention